And Jesus said to Peter, I for my part declare to you, you are rock, and on this rock I will build my church, and the jaws of death shall not prevail against it. Peter was the first, handpicked by Jesus the Christ to hold the keys to the kingdom of heaven. 2,000 years later, 263 men have followed in the footsteps of Peter the Apostle and have served as the leader of the church Jesus himself founded. The 263rd Peter in the history of the Roman Catholic Church is Pope John Paul II. His real name, Karol Józef Wojtyła, a native of Poland and the first non-Italian elected to the chair of Peter in more than 450 years. In the history of the Church, popes have been loved and adored, hated and despised. Some have been canonized as saints. Others have been tainted by corruption and have temporarily stained the Church with their indiscretions. But this Pope, Pope John Paul II, has touched the Church and the world in a most profound way. Modern communication has propelled his image and words to every corner of the earth. He has traveled to more than 115 countries during the 2+ decades of his papacy. He is credited with overthrowing communism in Russia and Eastern Europe. It is difficult to argue that Pope John Paul II has not become the most influential and most recognized person in the world. Now in the autumn of his life, the Pope is physically frail and weak. His robust and lively years are fast becoming faded memories. Some question his ability to lead. But the analogy to Christ himself is striking. Jesus, hanging on the cross of crucifixion, was a beaten, exhausted, and powerless man. On Calvary, Jesus was seemingly at the weakest point of his life. In fact, he was on the verge of his most commanding moment. As he had prophesied to his apostles, Jesus would rise from the dead. Christianity is a faith of contradictions. Scripture says we must give in order to receive. We must be pruned in order to grow, and we must die in order to live. If Scripture is right, then Pope John Paul II, now at what seems to be the most fragile point of his life, may be on the verge of his strongest, most powerful moment.
There are an awful lot of people in the world who think that he's a tired, all reactionary tyrant, and that the sooner we have a new, different pope, the better. There are people who, in my judgment, see in him only a one-dimensional person who's absolutely obsessed with power, right to life, and anti-abortion, and who's obsessed with not allowing priests to get married, celibacy, who's obsessed with women not being ordained. I think it obscures the other aspects, which is his devotion to social justice, human rights. From the very first time when I became engaged in the work I was doing about him and began traveling with him, being with him, I developed a sense that he is concerned, afraid that time is running out of him, that there's so much to be done in this world, so many places to visit, so many promises to keep. You know, a man of his age and condition to have this kind of traveling schedule, I think, to me at least, makes the point that he feels there's so much to do before he dies.
From the beginning of his papacy, John Paul II has made it a point to be present to his people. Millions around the world have flocked to see him and hear him.
This is all in the name of the Lord and to propagate the faith, to be visible all the time everywhere. You can summarize it simply by saying vigor unprecedented, range of interest unprecedented, depth of interest unprecedented, dedication to every and all possible cause unmatched, unprecedented. I do not believe that since Gregory the Great there has been a pope like him.
Little did Karol Wojtyła know as a youngster growing up in Wadowice, Poland, that God indeed had a great plan for his life. That someday he would be the worldwide leader of more than 1 billion Roman Catholics. Karol Józef Wojtyła was the third child of Karol Sr., a retired army officer, and Amelia Wojtyła. His brother Edmund was 14 years older than Karol. The Wojtyła's second child, a daughter named Olga, died as an infant. The Wojtyłas were a poor family. They led a modest and quiet life. Like the vast majority of Poles, they were deeply rooted in their Catholic faith. Morning prayers and evening scripture readings were habitual parts of their life. Karol grew up with the nickname Lolik, a name his close friends still call him today. He was an exceptional student and a good athlete. He loved the outdoors. His early life was not without tragedy. When he was only 8, his mother died from heart disease. His brother Edmund, who had become a physician, would die 3 years later from scarlet fever, a sickness he contracted from one of his patients. Now, Karol had only his father.
Bo ja go poznałam, kiedy on miał już 14 lat. To wiadomo było, że...
I met him when he was 14. He had been losing his nearest relatives one by one. He lost his mother, his brother, and only his father was left. And we knew in Wadowice that he was an extraordinary father to Karol. Not only was he a cook, a caretaker, a tailor to him, he was also his spiritual guide. There was a great, immense friendship between them. One could say that the father shaped his son. And Karol loved his father very much. It was definitely a great friendship, a great love, and his last link with the family.
As much as Karol Sr. molded his young son to be the man he grew up to be, the Polish culture played an equally important role. To understand the man, Pope John Paul II, demands a keen awareness of his predominantly Catholic homeland, Poland.
It's the Catholic Church that basically was the protector of the culture, not only the communicator of the faith of the people, but also the protector of the culture, of the very dignity of what it meant to be a Pole.
He was born at a time when Poland became independent for the first time since losing independence in the late part of the 18th century. So he grew up, he was surrounded by this newly found identity of Poland as independent, sovereign independent state.
The Faith Foundation is the key here, and we're not talking about being rooted in the Polish Church. The Polish Church is a vehicle for being rooted in the message of the gospel. Through the Church and its teachings, certainly the bishops, and through them the pastors, the priests, and the people were deeply rooted into the very meaning of the gospel itself.
I would say the Polish context, the Polishness of it all, began there and remained with him, I would say, as the dominant trait of his personality to this day. The Polishness meaning culturally, religiously, nationally, politically.
Poland's holiest national icon is Our Lady of Częstochowa. The picture has been enshrined at this monastery since 1382. For more than 600 years, Our Lady of Częstochowa, also known as the Black Madonna, has been the dominant symbol of Polish patriotism. Mary, the Virgin Mother of God, through this sacred icon, became Poland's Queen Mother. Even in the nation's darkest moments, the people of Poland, from its kings to its paupers, turned to Our Lady of Częstochowa for spiritual and emotional strength.
The path to God leads through Mary, and she will direct us toward Jesus.
And he would have had a very strong sense that to be devoted to Our Lady was to be patriotic Pole. A Polish army, consecrated as it was to Our Lady, would have worn pictures of Our Lady of Częstochowa on its breastplate. This would even explain how in modern times someone like Lech Wałęsa in the Solidarity movement wore the image of Our Lady of Częstochowa on the lapel of his coat, because he saw himself as a modern-day continuation of this noble Polish tradition that recognized its sovereignty, the sovereign of its realm, of its land in Our Lady Częstochowa.
The Wojtyłas, like most Polish families, came often to the shrine of Our Lady of Częstochowa to pray. For a young Karol Wojtyła, the Black Madonna would become an integral part of his Catholic faith and his lifelong quest to follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. His deep devotion to Mary, the Mother of God, would one day be emblazoned on his papal coat of arms. Totus tuus, it would say, translated, totally yours, and addressed directly to the Blessed Virgin Mary. If Karol Józef Wojtyła had not become a priest, there is little question that he would have become one of Poland's finest actors. He loved the theater. Friends described him as bright, witty, extremely intelligent, and one whose stage presence was masterful.
Ojciec został dyrektorem męskiego gimnazjum.
My father was a principal at an all-male high school. That's where I met Karol Wojtyła, as a friend at a time when he was a student at that high school. We had a drama club that created a strong bond between the two high schools. We staged many readings customarily assigned at school, dramas, comedies, and as it happened, Karol and I were usually cast in leading roles. That was how we met and how our lifelong friendship began. And we were certain that we'd both go on to become actors. He was a very handsome young man. He was tall, with his head always slightly bent, and with a big head of hair he could never tame. He had a beautiful voice and a very good delivery, but all that wasn't as important as the fact that he was so intriguing to other people. There was something distinct about him that was really hard to pin down. He wouldn't waste a minute of his time. He studied languages and read books of philosophy that were completely beyond our comprehension at the time. We were astonished that he had so much patience for them, and we admired and respected him. In the theater, too, he had a very distinct character. He'd always say his lines and poems differently. And even as a young man, he was already an intellectual. He'd deliver his lines in a very manly fashion, bringing to light the inner conflicts. So it was extraordinary. It was extraordinary. We staged Balladina. My father, the principal, was a strict disciplinarian and wouldn't allow a boy, who was to play Kostan. That's the second major part in the play, after the protagonist played by Karol, to take part in the show as a punishment for some mischief he had been up to. Well, suddenly we had a gaping chasm open up before us. It was on the eve of the first night, and Karol just said, "Don't you worry, we'll have our first night show tomorrow." See, the character I play dies early in the play, so I'll change my costume and play through the other part too. And indeed, on the next day, he went through the entire role in verse without a single error or change of situation. Now that testified to an uncommon talent.
No, to już znamionowało człowieka o niepospolitych zdolnościach.
By 1938, Karol Wojtyła had moved to Krakow. The younger Wojtyła enrolled in the university to continue his studies and further his talent for acting. But less than a year later, his plans were altered. What followed during the next several years would shape his life dramatically. Adolf Hitler had ordered a Nazi invasion of Poland. The Germans were determined to destroy the nation and every part of its culture. Unable and unwilling to fight the war with guns, Karol Wojtyła joined the underground resistance.
He belonged to a underground organization, it was called UNIA, UNIA, which kind of played a political role, a cultural role. I think it was understood from the very outset as a common sense thing that everybody need not be in a forest carrying a rifle, that there are other important ways of preserving the language which the Germans were trying to destroy, to preserve the culture which the Germans were trying to destroy.
So Wojtyła and a small group of fellow actors organized an underground theater. Its mission? Preserve the Polish culture through words, not weapons.
Jakim on był aktorem?
I can tell you what kind of actor he was. I watched the man who wanted to be an actor at that time for a long time, particularly at the Rhapsodic Theater, where we recited Polish national poetry. It was an underground secret theater. That's why Mieczysław Kotlarczyk, the director, would select poems that would lift the spirits of the desperate, terribly unhappy people under the occupation. When we staged our Theater of the Word, that's what you'd call it, he was the total opposite of a typical actor on stage who would progressively develop the role with some effects or external ideas. He wouldn't have any of it. He would make his role more and more aesthetic. He would go inward in order to expose its main thought, the main issue.
The German occupation was a horrific moment in Polish history. Many of Wojtyła's friends were arrested and sent to Auschwitz, the infamous Nazi death camp, only 15 miles away.
My żyli w Krakowie, zresztą
in Krakow, and not only in Krakow. We lived in the shadow of Auschwitz. We knew what was going on in there. We knew that you entered by the door, but left through the chimney. The specter of Auschwitz loomed over our heads all the time. You could get sent there for anything at all.
You have to bear in mind the extraordinary brutality of the Germans in deporting not only the Jewish population, but all kinds of other people.
gdyśmy się żegnali.
So we'd say goodbye over breakfast. We had no way of knowing if we would be seeing each other that night, whether we wouldn't be killed or caught. I mean, death was everywhere, always by your side. I had been hungry for 5 years. There was nothing to eat. So death in every shape and form was always close by. Nothing to make a fire with in the winter. It was so easy to fall ill and die of illness. Wojtyła was shocked. I was shocked. All of Poland was shocked.
His friends being imprisoned, tortured, killed, that had an enormous impact on him. Being the kind of person he is, this incredible dedication to human life, human dignity, human rights, And finally, the absolute sheer horror of what the Holocaust was when, at the end of the war, we all learned, and certainly he did, what Auschwitz, or Święcim in Polish, was, and Buchenwald and other camps. I would say this was one of the great influences on his psychological, intellectual, political life.
During the early years of the war, Karol Wojtyła narrowly escaped the Nazi terror. A strong and healthy young man, he worked as a common laborer in a rock quarry. It was during this time that he would meet a man named Jan Tyranowski. He would lead the future pope into a spiritual journey that would forever change his life. During the German occupation, Tyranowski recruited young men to become part of what he called living rosary groups.
It's going to be a class on inner life or spiritual life. My first thought, the Gestapo. I was terrified.
A short time later, Karol Wojtyła would join the group.
Someone knocked on the door. A young man entered the room. In my estimate, he might have been 10 or 15 years my senior. He had a high forehead. That's my way of saying that there was not much hair left on his head. He was dressed in working clothes, a jacket and pants. He had a bag over his shoulder made of the same fabric. He stooped a little and dragged his feet. Even though he was probably the strongest among us, the best body, the most athletic, still he had that posture. He was a bit round-shouldered, and that created the impression that he was 10 to 15 years older than he actually was. Gentlemen, let me introduce you. This is Karol, who wants to be an actor. Actually, he is an actor. And this is Mieczysław, who wants to be an engineer and build cars. I extended my hand. I murmured my last name under my breath. During the occupation, you never said your name out loud, only under your breath. And he said, "My name is Wojtyła." And that was the beginning. The main thing he wanted to convey to us, he taught us how to pray, beginning with mental prayer, then reflection, then meditation, all the way to contemplative prayer, where you don't read anything any longer. You don't need the support of any text or even prayer. You just face God, God's presence. Naturally, it wasn't limited to prayer. It was their entire life. One boy had nothing to eat. The Germans caught the father of another one. Someone got killed in a roundup. Someone had no shoes. Someone else had nothing to put in the stove. There was no coal. The day-to-day problems of the boys he was taking care of just fell on him. And this is how he began to understand what ministry was about. The reason I'm talking about Mr. Tyranowski at such length is that if not for Mr. Tyranowski, Cardinal Wojtyła would have never become a priest, so he wouldn't be the Pope either. And I wouldn't be a priest either. I'm quite convinced of that, as I look back on our lives.
As Karol Wojtyła drew deeper into the spiritual realm of his life, his call to be a priest began to take root. Acting was a great gift from God. He knew that. But being a priest of God and touching the lives of people on a spiritual and ultimately eternal level was the greater and more meaningful call. As if life were not difficult enough already in war-torn Poland, it became worse for the young Wojtyła. Coming home one day from his job at the quarry, he found his father lying dead in their small home. The death of his father was his final motivation to enter the priesthood.
They lived together in that little house by the river. They lived in the basement, and they were incredibly close.
Ja przypuszczam, bo Karol się nam nie zwierzy.
And I guess, because Carol never spoke about it, the death of his father was the last straw in Carol's decision to choose another path.
The moment of his father's death was probably the greatest single blow he ever suffered before or since, if one is to try to point to a single tragedy. Now, the father's death was very, very crucial. I think there's no question that this was the final push into priesthood.
Już wtedy on myślał,
He was already contemplating a major change in his life, but he never revealed anything. So during a rehearsal at the Rhapsodic Theater, where again we played together, he said that he was going to study theology. It was kind of a shock to us, even though we knew he was a very religious person, spiritually profound, even back in Wadowice. He'd kneel before Our Lady for hours in the Wadowice parochial church.
He did not want to leave the father alone, so I think he waited until the Holy Spirit told him, or God's will told him, that this was the time to do it. It's God's will that he should become a priest.
Becoming a Catholic priest in German-occupied Poland was a dangerous venture. But Krakow's archbishop would not be deterred. He opened an underground seminary to begin training Poland's next generation of priests.
Bo tu trzeba powiedzieć,
Let's set it straight. There were no seminaries then. It was under the occupation, and all seminaries were closed. The Germans wanted to destroy the Catholic Church by cracking down on priests. They closed universities, so theological departments were closed too. They closed seminaries and simply wanted to do away with the whole thing. The ordinary was not allowed to accept new seminarians, but Archbishop Sapieha simply created an underground seminary. The seminarians kept working at their day jobs and doing whatever they were doing, and at the same time, they were studying and diligently taking exams. As seminarians, as students of theology, we were together during the occupation. It was on the so-called Black Sunday. The Germans detained all the men in Krakow. They went door to door, took men not from the street, but from the apartments. It was the day when the Warsaw Uprising began on August 1st, 1944. They were afraid there might be an uprising in Krakow too, so they detained all men. It was pure coincidence that neither Wojtyła nor I was detained. Cardinal Sapieha then told us, "Come to my residence." He also invited those who were in the underground. There were some 10 or 12 of us.
Until the war ended in 1945, Wojtyła and the other seminarians never left the Archbishop's residence. It was there they continued their clandestine studies and patiently hoped and prayed the war would end soon.
myśmy musieli lewe papiery.
We had to get ourselves some fake IDs right away, or else, if the Germans had found us, we would have all been sent to Auschwitz. So for the next half year, until January 18th, 1945, between August 8th, 1944 and January 18th, 1945, we were confined to Sapieha's residence. He gave us one of the living rooms. We had beds along the walls and a table where we worked and studied across the middle. He did his third year of studies. I did my first. And I could see how he functioned within the group. There was no doubt that he was the best brain. He was simply unrivaled. Intellectually speaking, he was matchless.
Karol Wojtyła would become Father Karol Wojtyła in 1946. With the war over, the newly ordained priest headed to Rome for 2 years of study. Then it was back to Poland as an assistant pastor and professor of theology at the Catholic University of Lublin. There he would begin to make his mark as a true humanitarian. He began to touch lives in the simplest of ways.
Starał się jednak być narzędziem.
He's always tried to be an instrument of divine mercy. And it had been self-evident ever since his childhood. His concern, his care for others, his relations with co-workers, with friends, and with the Jews. He had Jewish friends, and he still does. Later, as a student and as a young priest, he cared for the poor. I mean, I would want to emphasize this. He was very poor himself. Not that he didn't have any money, but his money, all he had, was for everyone to use. And he initially left half of his professor's salary at my disposal. Later, he left all his salary to be distributed among the needy. He stated only one condition. Those who received it were not to know where it had come from. He never refused to spend time with someone to talk. He never refused anyone. When he was asked to help, or when he saw some misery around him, he regarded it as a personal challenge. And he always remembered about our problems and our joys. When my mother died, he learned about it from someone else and sent his condolences. He always remembered our name days. He also remembered he promised to celebrate my wedding at some bizarre time on a Monday morning, because that was the only time we had available. And yes, he drove a few hundred kilometers just to marry us. He's always been with people. I think that's why they love him. One thing I can be certain of, it's very personal. I've never told it to anyone. It's really very personal. When I was standing before the altar with my wife, he told us something like, every time you experience problems, every time you experience difficulties, remember this moment, what you just said before God, and it will be the source of your renewed strength. Yes, it has proven true. I can tell you the well-known anecdote about how he sat with my son under the table. That's a story I can always tell. So, when he came to visit, my child, still rather little and shy, went under the table. And he said, I'm going to get you there too. And they spent a good hour playing under the table. To be sure, he was already a bishop then. I see him as a man who doesn't focus as much on standing up to evil or talking about how to avoid evil, as he teaches how to create good, and most of all, carries it into effect himself. To tell people what not to do, but to encourage them to do good.
By the late 50s, Father Wojtyła was elected to the office of auxiliary bishop in Krakow. In 1964, he was appointed archbishop. He would play a key role in Vatican II, as he helped write several important documents on church renewal. In 1967, at the age of 47, he became one of the youngest cardinals in the Roman Catholic Church. Then, in October of 1978, After the untimely death of Pope John Paul I, on the 7th ballot, Karol Cardinal Wojtyła of Poland was elected to the highest office in the Catholic Church. His legacy to the papacy would be extraordinary. The man who turned his back on a promising stage career to follow the call of Jesus has turned the entire world into a stage, traveling worldwide to evangelize and preach the good news of Christ. Television has only added to the mystique and the message.
He is the first pope who has used it as intensively. Paul VI was televised. There's a difference between being televised and using television. He is an absolute genius at using technology, which is television. Because of his theater background, he understands the angles. He knows when you look in the camera and when you don't, how to position your head so the correct angles. Some people are absolute at ease in the presence of a camera and therefore they're naturals, and others are not. He's a natural. He's a born actor, and television is simply another way of being being seen in public. He has a profound sense of knowing the technology. He knows all about CNN.
And what a sense of humor. It was unbelievable for a pope to be cracking jokes, to have a sense of humor, to treat other people as equal partners in conversation. He's the first pope with a human face. Remember him going like that with both hands and pretending to be looking at the crowds through a pair of binoculars? He shouldn't be monkeying around. He's the pope.
During his pontificate, Pope John Paul II has electrified the Catholic faithful and has helped to change dramatically the world's political makeup. Among other things, his pastoral leadership has been credited with the fall of the Iron Curtain, toppling communism in Russia and Eastern Europe.
If not for the Pope, there would be no solidarity. No solidarity, no revolution in Poland. No revolution in Poland, no perestroika. If not for the Pope, we'd all probably still be kept on a very short leash. Not just Poland, but even the US and the rest of the world by the Soviet Union. So from the geopolitical perspective, he played an unprecedented role. It's important to keep this in mind. As far as I know, there are already 2 popes with the surname the Great, Leo the Great and Gregory the Great. One of the presidents of the Institute for Ethics in Washington proposed that this pope deserves the surname the Great as well. The world wouldn't be the same now if not for the pilgrimages. His pilgrimages turned the world around. But he has such charisma. He's so charming, so fascinating.
The Pope, again, private or not, is an extraordinary extrovert who one should listen, admire, in some cases, I guess, love. I don't know of any case, Gorbachev said the same thing to me, other people have too. In every single case, the great leaders respond, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Buddhist, Muslim, you name it, respond that way, although he makes people feel very much at home. I'd never seen Castro so humble. There's something in him that is not awe-inspiring, but it's something that creates sort of an aura of absolute total respect. Gorbachev confirmed to me, and I have this in the book, that the first time when he, the Communist General, met the Pope in Warsaw, he literally trembled in his booth. There's something in that man which is so inspiring.
Those closest to Pope John Paul II say the one overriding characteristic which dominates his life is his devotion and faithfulness to prayer. Even his childhood friends remember the holiness and prayerfulness of the lad they called Lolik.
Jeszcze w Wadowicach
Even in Wadowice, his piety was remarkable. We'd all stop by the church before school would start at 8 in the morning. And there was a small shrine to Our Lady there. Friends of mine who went there on many occasions to study with him told me that they'd sometimes show up for the tutorials in the afternoon and have to wait for a long time. And through the door, slightly ajar to the other room, they could see him kneeling along with his father, and they could hear them pray out loud.
To jest rzecz, która może się...
His most remarkable quality, a thing that characterizes Wojtyła best, the way he prayed. Actually, it was more than just prayer. It was as though he directed his whole being to God. When he became a bishop, the closest circle of his students would go to Krakow to take his seminars, and would go to the mountains. You could call this an open seminar. There we could see how he lived with God. Yes, that's the best way to put it. We'd drive to Turbaz, and the seminar would be conducted on the way up the mountain. It's a sizable mountain, and it takes a few hours to climb. And it often came to pass that he'd step aside and walk at a distance from us, next to us, ahead of us, or behind us. And we'd know, I don't know how, but we would, that we must not disturb him, that this was his moment with God.
tej twarzy był taki jakiś...
I could see in his face the effort of leaving everything that surrounded him behind and reaching out to something over there, which we cannot attain. And it made a tremendous impression on me. I could see that he was in a realm which is beyond our reach.
Dla mnie, dla nas niedostępny.
It is the most important single activity of his day. One of his very close friends, Cardinal in Rome, Polish Cardinal, tells him that he spends about 7 hours a day in prayer, which begins when he gets up in the morning and says the first Mass, then the one after breakfast when he has guests.
Pope John Paul II is a mystic. He has the gift of prayer in a very, very deep sense, and it is a gift. And he nurtures this gift, he exercises this gift, and this gift in turn sustains him in the peace in which he lives. He is someone whom his prayer takes immediately out of his chapel into the world, into the piazza. And when he's in the piazza, his lips are moving because he is in prayer to the Father, just as he's in the midst of the people of God.
Traveling with him, being with him sometimes, you will see him. He will sometimes close his eyes very tight while things go on. He is praying when he does that. Prayer is absolutely paramount and vital for him.
Pope John Paul II, more than 50 years a priest, more than 20 years as the Vicar of Christ, the personal representative of Jesus Christ on earth. In examining his papacy closely, it is almost as if God handpicked this man specifically to lead the Catholic Church at this time in history. There is certainly a sense of destiny about his leadership. Karol Wojtyła survived several near-death experiences. Early in his life, a grade school classmate fired a gun at his head and barely missed. Later in life, he would survive 2 assassination attempts, one in 1981 in St. Peter's Square by Turkish gunman Ali Aja. The second, a year later, when a priest in Spain went after him with a bayonet. It is as if the hand of God were guiding him through each episode.
Ten czas, kiedy w czasie wojny on pracował w kamieniołomie tam w
He worked at the quarry in Solvay, not far from Krakow, and he was run over by a German military truck on his way home from work. When I was already his assistant, he became very ill, and doctors actually doubted that he could get better. Actually, no one knew. Some suspected leukemia, a very acute case of leukemia. And those who saw him, because he was at Krakow at home, I would just go there, stop by for a moment, and then leave. But they said that the disease ended in a very mysterious way. One day, he simply got up, in the pink of health.
I was a few feet from him the day he was shot in St. Peter's Square. I visited him as he lay in bed in Gemelli Hospital in Rome. I was privileged to see him on that occasion and to see the serenity and the love which expressed his total acceptance of this and his total offering of this for the church, for the gospel, and as a gift to the Lord.
He completely devoted himself to God. He sacrificed himself, whole and entire, through the Virgin, totus tuus. He simply draws his strength from them. I mean, the Holy Father felt a personal need, not only to forgive Ali Aja in his heart, but also to proclaim his forgiveness to the world. It's not easy to face your killer, but he did it. And he did it with all honesty. I think he wanted to show people that this is what one had to do. That's the Christian way. That's our way. And there is no other way. Everybody warned him. It wasn't something that came out of the blue, Ali Aja gunning him down in St. Peter's Square. It had been in the air for some time. I think it was the risk he took into account in his life. He still does. I believe that had he followed all the instructions of his security service and acted accordingly, he'd have kept at a distance from the people, without any personal contact. But I'm deeply convinced he wants that contact very much, because it has its pastoral significance. People want to talk to him, to touch him. He's aware of that, and he'll continue to act in this way.
In this very act of victimhood, he was also the herald of mercy and forgiveness and pardon, because he was shot on a Wednesday, and by Sunday morning he had already recorded his message of forgiveness, offering forgiveness, that is, to the man who had shot him. My understanding was that the Pope was convinced from the very moment that he was shot, that he was convinced that the Lord was with him and that he was under the protection of our Blessed Mother, and that this was not to be the end. He has made multiple references to the fact that this attempt on his life took place on the 13th of May, the anniversary of one of the apparitions at Fatima. He saw this connection simply in terms of God's providence, that our Blessed Mother would protect him as she had always done, it was a sign of her commitment to protect him and to bring his ministry to fulfillment.
Pope John Paul II is a champion of peace and human rights. When he sees people hurt people, when he sees injustice in the world, when he sees evil overtake good, he speaks out. From wars and genocide to the murder of unborn children and the deterioration of family life around the world, Pope John Paul II proclaims clearly the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is his legacy. It is his hope for the salvation of the world.
His agenda is not to find out what pleases his constituents. His agenda is to proclaim the Word of God, which is the basis of all justice and the basis of all human society that is in accord with the norms of justice, righteousness, and peace.
That's one of Wojtyła's missions, to help people to reach after good and God from inside. He knows how great an effort one has to make in order to reach after good and the truth. That's why he never denounces anyone, even an evil person. He will combat someone's opinions, what someone says and proclaims. But he'd never denounce the person because he knows what difficulties await one on the way to truth.
Mnie się wydaje, że
So I think, what an extraordinary, wise, profound, and great man do we have as a pope. And at the same time, so humble and unpretentious. He's a man who, through personal contacts, through his exhaustive writings and public speaking, purifies the world.
I greet you all in the name of Jesus Christ. He is the way, the truth, and the life.
Hello, I'm Frank Camacho for the Mercy Foundation. As a broadcaster for the CNN television affiliate in Phoenix, Arizona, I can testify to the immense power and influence of modern media, especially television. Perhaps no invention in the past 50 years has changed our lives as much as television. Many of us saw the first presidential debate, moonwalk, space shuttle launch, or Gulf War coverage on TV. We've been enlightened, educated, and inspired by television. It is through this medium that the Mercy Foundation, a nonprofit Catholic television production company, introduces viewers to dramatic true stories of faith, hope, and charity. Although the Mercy Foundation originally began here in Phoenix in 1992, its spirit and charism was born more than 50 years earlier through the life and work of the Polish saint Maximilian Kolbe. As a Catholic priest and publisher, Father Kolbe used the most advanced printing techniques of his day. He spread the gospel throughout Europe and Japan by publishing and distributing millions of copies of the Night of the Immaculata, the magazine he founded and consecrated to the Virgin Mary. In 1941, during his imprisonment at Auschwitz, a Nazi concentration camp, Father Kolbe sacrificed his life for another prisoner, a total stranger, thus giving unquestionable proof of his commitment to live Christ's gospel. However, before his death, St. Maximilian had already imparted his noble vision.
Therefore, the press, and now even the radio and the cinema, and in the future, any other invention must be directed to enlighten minds and to revivify hearts.
In the spirit of St. Maximilian, the Mercy Foundation utilizes the latest in broadcast technology to promote greater faith, encourage virtues, and educate today's Catholics. This mission ensures a quality production that will continue to enlighten the minds and to inspire the hearts of audiences for years to come. Projects produced by the Mercy Foundation range from documentaries on the real presence of Christ in the Holy Eucharist to biographies of the lives of saints, as well as human interest stories and the activity of the Holy Spirit in the Church today. Here now is a look at some of the Mercy Foundation's more recent projects.
Her life and death captured a nation. Her forgiveness captured the heart of her killer. Now available on video, the remarkable true story of the world's youngest saint. Little Maria Goretti showed forgiveness in an unforgiving world. Watch as witnesses to her life and virtues remember this 11-year-old heroine. Her heart-rending story comes to life in this Mercy Foundation epic, 14 Flowers of Pardon. Recent polls indicate more than 2/3 of American Catholics do not believe in the 2,000-year-old church teaching on the real presence of Christ in the Holy Eucharist. Now, a new documentary from the Mercy Foundation investigates the growing number of astonishing reports of Eucharistic miracles. Where are they happening? What do they mean? This is a moving expose that will enkindle the hearts of believers and bring skeptics to the threshold of faith. In Living Presence, reports of Eucharistic miracles in America.
Mercy Foundation began in 1992 for the purpose of producing and distributing Catholic documentaries. There's two themes that we try to promote through these documentaries. One is stories of God's mercy in our modern times. The other is the real presence in the Holy Eucharist.
When production is completed on a Mercy Foundation project, a global audience is waiting. This is accomplished through a cooperative relationship with Eternal Word Television Network in Birmingham, Alabama, which broadcasts to 55 million households in 29 countries. Other venues used by the Mercy Foundation to promote its films are screenings and premieres of newly released projects and through direct mail.
The Mercy Foundation projects are produced by both film and television professionals. Then, for specific tasks such as narration, music composition, voiceover, and even graphic design, we'll hire people for those specific tasks. Anything additional like the day-to-day operations, we have volunteers come in to do that to help us out.
Demanding, time-consuming, and exhausting describe the production process. But even with these pressures, crew members of the Foundation's production team have expressed their sense of fulfillment when a project is completed.
I think the greatest contribution that the Mercy Foundation is providing, or role it's playing, is storytelling. Storytelling, telling the stories of how God is working here in our modern times. Whether it's through miracles, stories of mercy or love.
People talk a lot about God, but the fruit of God being in your heart is acting it out. And for the Mercy Foundation and for me, we act out that love that's in our hearts by doing these projects and anything we can to give the people an opportunity to see God, to feel God in their hearts, and to experience Him in some ways.
Should the Mercy Foundation staff or volunteers ever forget the words and vision of St. Maximilian Kolbe, they don't have to walk far for his inspiration. The Foundation's production offices are located at Marytown, on the grounds of the National Shrine of St. Maximilian Kolbe in Libertyville, Illinois. It is in this atmosphere that the Mercy Foundation will continue to fulfill St. Maximilian's vision.
This is where you fit in. You were just a gift of God, because we did not have any videotaping capabilities at this particular point. So when you came in to visit, it was like Our Lady sent you, because you were the perfect solution to open up another avenue of technology, of the latest media. And I believe the St. Maximilian Kolbe sent you. After all, you have consecrated your entire ministry to St. Maximilian Kolbe, so why should he not be leading you here, even without you or ourselves knowing that? You fit in perfectly. And you fall into line of Marytown's vision and into St. Maximilian Kolbe's vision perfectly.
The vital contribution of the Mercy Foundation's work is reflected in the hearts of the countless viewers touched by these films. Letters received at the Foundation's office from all over the United States, Europe, and even Africa and Japan testify to this fact. But to continue the Mercy Foundation, we need your support. Projects are entirely funded through private philanthropy and the sales of videotapes. As a nonprofit 501c3 organization, all contributions are tax deductible. With your help, St. Maximilian's dream will continue to flourish by simply purchasing some of these inspiring films for yourself, family members, or friends. At a time when many television programs emphasize the worst in humanity, the Mercy Foundation is following the example set by St. Maximilian Kolbe to use modern media to enlighten minds and revive hearts through programs of faith, hope, and charity. For the Mercy Foundation, I'm Frank Camacho. Thanks for your support, and thanks for watching.
For a complete list of films produced by the Mercy Foundation, or for information, call toll-free 888-286-3729. That's 888-AT-MERCY. To contact the Mercy Foundation by mail, write to the Mercy Foundation, Shrine of St. Maximilian Kolbe, 1600 West Park Avenue, Libertyville, Illinois, 60048. If you would like to visit the Mercy Foundation's internet website, the address is www.mercyfoundation.org.